Right, choosing the right plant. This is one of my favorite things. Choosing the right plant. So how do you choose plants? Here's how people usually choose plants. Saturday morning. Honey, don't you think if we put some shrubs along this side of the house here, it would look so, this side of the house is kind of plain, there's nothing really here. So wouldn't some shrubs look good? Yeah, I think they would. Well, what do you think we should plant? Now, when you ask Honey what you think we should plant, you're assuming Honey has this encyclopedia of plants in their brains. Now, honestly, does Honey have an encyclopedia of plants in their brain? Not if they're just an average person. So what does Honey say? Oh, I don't know. What about azaleas? Why azaleas? Because that's the one shrub Honey knows. Now, that is no way to choose a shrub for this location based on the least informed person you could probably ask, right? So don't even ask Honey. Once Honey says we want some shrubs, that's it. That's all you should ask from Honey after that. But what you can decide is, and how you need to choose the plants, is not by saying, well, do you think we should plant azaleas? Do you think we should plant camellias? Do you think we should plant gardenias? That's the wrong approach. That's the wrong approach. Don't start off trying to think of what kind of plant to plant. Think about what it needs to be, and then find the plant that most closely fits what you need it to be. So here's what we do. Honey, would you like to see some shrubs along here? Yeah, I would. Well, do you want them to be evergreen or deciduous? Oh, I don't want it to drop the leaves in the wintertime, look like a bunch of sticks. So evergreen, all right, so we want evergreen shrubs. How big you want them to be? Well, we got windows right here, so we don't want anything that gets to be more than maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. So I want an evergreen shrub that will grow to be about 4 feet tall or less. You want some flowers? Well, of course. I mean, color's always nice, so how about some flowers? Well, when do you want them to bloom? Spring, summer, fall, winter? Well, everything blooms in the spring, and there's color everywhere. Let's choose something that blooms in the fall. See if we can find something that'll bloom in the fall when not so much is in bloom. And, well, what color should they be? Well, we got these blue shutters and stuff. How about if we choose something that's, pink or red? Maybe something in those areas. I think it'd look good with the shutters. So now you're ready to go to the nursery. No plant has been discussed. You know what it needs to be. You just have left in the air what kind of shrub you're going to select. So you go to the nursery. Now, what do you usually do? I'm looking for a good shrub to plant alongside my house. What do you think I should get? Oh, well, let me show you the 50 shrubs we have for sale. How are you going to pick? You might buy what's on sale. That's no way to pick a plant. Or the staff person might go, this is especially nice. This is a really good shrub that I think would be the perfect choice for you. Without you realizing that morning at the staff meeting, the owner of the nursery said, we have way too many of these shrubs, so every chance you can get, sell these, because we have too many. That's no way for you to select your shrubs either. But when you walk into the nursery and say, I'm looking for a good shrub, they can sell you anything. You've given them no information about what you need or want at all. That's your fault. Again, it's like walking into a shoe store and saying, I'm looking for a good pair of shoes. What kind of shoes would you get? Really? What kind of shoes would they sell you? Whatever they wanted, because you've told them nothing. Hadn't given them their size, what you want to do in them, how much you want to spend, what color you want them to be. The salesperson needs to know all that. Selecting plants is no different. So when you get shoes, you think to yourself, I wear a size 9, I want dress shoes, I want them to be brown, I want them to be lace up, and I don't want to spend more than $100. When you walk in and you tell the salesperson that, you're going to get the shoes you're looking for. So you walk in the nursery and say, hi, can you help me? Are you free? Sure, what you need? I'm looking for an evergreen shrub that will be blooming pink, preferably in the fall, and mature out at about 4 feet tall. Oh, and by the way, this area gets sun in the morning and then shade through the rest of the day. So once you told the salesperson that information, now they can take you around to the 3 or 4 shrubs that fit that description most closely. And you can choose from those 3 or 4 shrubs that are going to be what you want them to be because you have the description right there. That's how you choose plants. That's how you choose your shade trees. How big should it be? What's its purpose? You're going to shade a little patio. You're going to shade a 2-story house. We use deciduous trees for shading. Why? Because we want the shade in the summertime when it's hot, but we want the sun in the wintertime when it's cold. And a deciduous tree drops its leaves and lets the sun shine on your patio, lets the sun shine on your house to help warm it up in the winter when that's welcome. So again, the way to choose plants is not to think to yourself, what kind of plant do we need to plant here? Never try to think of a name first. The name is the last part of the process. You have to think about what you want first, and then you try to find the plant that matches what you want. In a reference, me, Miles. If you asked me that question earlier, I told you about the bedding plant for the shade, for the summer shade garden that's pink and under a foot. That's a description. If a person gives me that description, I can help them a lot. If somebody says, I'm just looking for a pretty shower to plant in a shady area, I have to ask questions. Here's some other ways that we choose besides listing what we want. Sometimes we just don't like stuff. I have friends that hate those chartreuse-leaved plants. They just think they look sick. The plants with those golden yellow leaves, they just hate it. Other friends love it. Well, that's your taste. That's perfectly valid to guide you in your aesthetic choices. Sometimes you just say, I got to have one of those. I don't care. I don't care if I don't have any place to grow it. I got to have one. So that's fine. Buying plants like that is keeping our nurseries in business. They buy, they die, you buy another one. I mean, it's just a great way to keep our nurseries going. And sometimes we have sentimental choices. You might grow a sweet olive because Mama had one, and you remember the smell of sweet olives, and it makes you think about home and your childhood. And that's another wonderful reason. If you have a good place to put a sweet olive that's suitable, well, that's another way you can choose plants as well. What role will it play? Every plant serves a purpose, and we normally don't think about that. Now, even if the purpose is just to provide color, every plant has a purpose. Before you buy a plant and bring it home, always ask yourself, what purpose will this plant serve in my landscape? And you may say, well, it's a little flowering bedding plant. It's going to serve to add some color to my front garden, to dress it up, to make it look special when people drive by. What is the reason that you're going to be buying that plant and planting it? By thinking of the purpose, it really helps you focus down on the plants that would work. By clearly identifying the role they play or their purpose, it really helps you a lot. Again, if you say, I'm looking for a shade tree at the nursery, well, is it to shade a patio where you want maybe a 15-foot tall tree, 20-foot tall perhaps? Or is it to shade a 2-story house where you need a 50-foot tall tree? They're both shade trees, but their purpose calls for radically different sizes. So some of the things you might be looking at provide shade. You may want to divide spaces. You've got to break your spaces up a little bit. Well, planting shrubs can do that. Screening views. You don't want your neighbors looking at you when you sunbathe in the nude. Providing color. Providing wildlife food. A lot of people are interested in providing wildlife food. And if you add that to your list of things that you want from the plants in your landscape, then you can begin to incorporate it. So if you think, I'm looking for a shade tree once again, and you say, I'm looking for a shade tree that also provides wildlife food, well, then you might go with an oak that provides acorns, a very valuable source of wildlife food, or a magnolia that provides food for beetles, or all kinds of things that you could do. I want it just to attract attention with a lot of personality, a lot of color. So think about what it's going to do for you in the landscape, and that's also a great way, a good exercise in deciding what kind of plant. And we've already gone through the growing conditions. And this is another important factor that comes in early in the plant selection process. You've got to be aware of the growing conditions where you want to plant the plant. And so when I was talking about those shrubs along the side of the house, I kind of forgot to mention the growing conditions till towards the end, but that's one of the first things you look at. What are the growing conditions? That goes into that list of characteristics, grows well with morning sun, that you will use to select the right plant. What plant likes to grow with poor drainage or perfect drainage? How many times have you planted something that got bigger than you expected it to? Don't even raise your hand, I'm sorry. I know the answer to that. The only reason why that happens is you didn't bother to find out how big it got. This is not rocket science. So every plant, remember, at the nursery is an infant. It's either an infant or a toddler. They are very young. All of them have a great deal of growth to do. Why do you think it's called a nursery? Because young baby plants are sold there. That's why it's called a nursery. So everything you buy is going to get big. If you bought a puppy, you would never buy a puppy without knowing the breed, or at least knowing the mama and the daddy. Because looking at a puppy does not tell you how big it's going to be when it's older. All puppies are little and cute. But some puppies grow up to be a horse, and some puppies grow up to sit on your lap their whole life. So again, you don't know that unless you find the breed or see the parents. So again, always ask or look up what is the maximum size, height, and spread this plant is going to be at maturity before you plant it. So you don't have to dig it up when it overwhelms everything around it and keeps on going. Never plant anything in your landscape without understanding clearly what its mature size is. In addition to all the other things I've been mentioning, there are all kinds of other things you can add to your list that you might want. We've talked about flowers, fragrance, season of bloom. You're looking for native plants or plants that provide wildlife food. You've got to decide if it's deciduous or evergreen. Pest tolerance. It's not a bad idea when you're buying a plant at the nursery to ask, so what kind of pest does this plant have? Everything has pests. It's a good idea to know what is going to attack that plant. And they should be able to say, well, we got problems with aphids sometimes on this, or caterpillars will chew holes in the leaves. Be forewarned. And then I have people, believe it or not, will occasionally call or email me and say, I'm looking for some really nice plants to put in front of my house. What would you recommend? Annuals? Perennials? Shrubs? Throw me a line. Give me something to work with here. What do you want? Shrubs? Flowers? Oh, just some flowers. Flowering shrubs, bedding plants. So again, the more you think through what you want, the more help you can get from a professional. That's the way it is in all kinds of things. The more you know what you want and where you're going, the better a professional can help you. Now, very quickly, I should have told you at the beginning that by the time we reached 2:45, your brain would be fried. Did I tell y'all that? So your brain should be mostly fried at this point. But I do want to do a really quick garden season presentation because this also fits in with what we're doing. South Louisiana gardening seasons. Now, a number of years ago, some coworkers of mine and I sat down in New Orleans and said the seasons as they are presented to us through our lives don't match the growing seasons. Fall, winter, spring, and summer, the way we grew up understanding them, doesn't really jive with the gardening seasons we have here in the Deep South. And so we began to look at it and came up with this idea of changing some of the names. So here's what we generally have. We define the seasons based on the calendar. The spring equinox, when we have an equal period of light and darkness, occurs in March, and that's the first day of spring. So we determine when spring begins by the first day that we have an equal period of light and darkness. Then around about June, we get our summer solstice, and that's when we have the longest period of light and the shortest period of darkness in a 24-hour period, and that's the summer solstice, and that's the beginning of summer. Summer doesn't begin until June 20th, and we know good and well down here, we wish it didn't get hot till June 20th. The fall equinox, again, about the same number of hours of light and dark occur in the early 20s of September. That's the beginning of fall, and winter begins in December on about the 20th. And these dates vary 20, 21st, 22nd from year to year to year. Now that's how we divide the year up. And how we look at the seasons: spring, renewed growth, an awakening of dormant deciduous trees and shrubs. The spring bulbs and the shrubs are all blooming. In the summer, we have abundant growth, lots of flowers and vegetables. We're mowing our lawns. It's hot and it's humid. In the fall, we have the end of the growing season. We think of the fall as the end of the year. Have you noticed that? The frost is on the pumpkin, everything's going dormant or closing things down. Plants wind down in their dormancy, we get crisp weather and fall color. And finally, winter, we have a cold, dormant season. There's little or no growth. We have killing freezes occurring and not much gardening going on. This is how we think traditionally of the 4 seasons, and this is not how we garden down here. The winter, for instance, is an incredibly active time of the year for us to garden. It is not a downtime. When is our downtime? July and August, right now. Right now we're sitting reading gardening books with our feet propped up in front of the air conditioner. We would be loath to go outside and do any gardening unless we absolutely have to. So this is our downtime. This is a sit by the air conditioner and be quiet inside time. Winter in December, again, 75 degrees at Christmas. We're out gardening if we want to. So how do the seasons really begin and end here? When we look at these gardening seasons, they fit more appropriately with what we're doing through the season. So I abandoned all of the equinoxes and solstices and the traditional way we divide the seasons, and we divide the year up based on the growing seasons that we use down here. So let me show you what we call these. Spring is called the first warm season, and it runs from mid-March to mid-May. That's because this is a particular hunk of growing time that we have with certain conditions. We have mild weather, daytime highs in the 70s and 80s, nighttime lows in the 50s and 60s. We're planting warm season bedding plants, warm season vegetables. We're starting to lay lawns. We'll do that all summer long. And we finish planting hardy trees and shrubs at this time because the heat is moving in. So during this first warm season, very active in the flower garden, very active in the vegetable garden, a very pleasant and wonderful time of the year to get out and garden, and the ending of our planting season, our cool planting season for hardy trees, shrubs, vines, and ground covers. Around about May, we transition into the hot season. The hot season for me is when we begin to hit the 90s regularly. So sometime in May, we start hitting the 90s, and we start to hit the 90s, we're in the hot season. And this is a long season, a trying season that runs here all the way until mid-September, when hopefully we'll start getting a few cool fronts moving through. Sometimes it's not until October. Now, tropicals love our hot season. They thrive. Go walk out there and look at the collection of tropicals on the other side of the parking, wherever the parking lot is. I'm directionally challenged, thank you. They're gorgeous. They love it when it hits the 90s, and that's why even though we have trouble getting them through the winter, we will always use tropicals because nothing looks better in our landscapes than tropicals this time of the year. Very hot, it's unpleasant. We don't do a whole lot of work once we get into July and August. Daytime highs in the 80s and 90s and nighttime lows in the mid to upper 70s, and y'all, the nighttime lows are very stressful to plants. If it would get down in the 60s, it doesn't matter if it gets up into the 80s or 90s as much. It's staying so warm at night that it's so stressful on our plants. When it doesn't get down lower than the upper 70s, they're just very stressed out at those, except for the tropicals. Then we have the second warm season. Now, this is what we would normally call the fall. And fall has connotations of, again, dormancy, winding it down, getting ready for the cold of winter, wrapping things up. Nothing could be further from the truth. When we hit our second warm season, we do some of the same things we did in the first warm season. We plant tomatoes. Have you ever noticed why we plant tomatoes in the spring? We plant tomatoes again in the fall. And that's because the second warm season has very similar temperatures to the first warm season, and that these two times of the year have a lot in common. Even though we don't think spring is like the fall, it is here. It is here. We're not looking at a harsh winter that's going to wipe everything out. We're looking at a mild winter. So September through early November is when we start getting back into our gardens after this heat of summer. Very active season for vegetables. We're planting warm season vegetables like tomatoes and peppers. We're planting cool season vegetables and bedding plants at this time of the year. These are the plants that will go all the way through the cool season. And this begins our prime planting season for hardy trees and shrubs. And that is, as we move past September into October, November, it begins our prime landscape planting season. Our prime landscape planting season for trees, shrubs, ground covers, everything but lawns is in the cool season from October, November until February, March. That is our prime planting season. So again, the second warm season is similar to the first warm season, and we're even planting some of the same things that we did back then. And then finally, in late November, we begin to transition into the cool season. And this is another major season for us. Normally speaking, wherever you are in the state, the cool season comes in as the daytime highs start staying more in the 50s, 60s, and occasional 70s, and the nighttime lows start getting down in the 30s and 40s. By all means, once you start having a freeze or two, you are definitely in the cool season. Now, this is a very active planting season. We plant all through the winter, all through the winter. We're planting trees, shrubs, ground covers, perennials, and vines. Hardy, the ones that don't mind the winter temperatures, love to be planted in the wintertime. You remember when I told you the hierarchy of food distribution? Do you remember that? Once the plant makes the food, the flowers and the seeds get the first crack at it, then the leaves get the next crack at it, then the stems get the next crack at it, and the low totem pole is the root system. The roots get the leftovers. So all summer long, while shrubs and trees are growing, blooming, making seeds, all of their food is going into that, and there's little food left over for the root system. But in the fall of the years, we move into the, as I mentioned, the second warm season. As we move into this time of the year and start moving into the fall around about November, the plants have all slowed down. They're not growing anymore. They finished flowering, they've dropped their seeds already, but they still have leaves on them. So in October, November, early December, they're making food and they have a lot of it left over to send down to their roots. So in the fall of the year, woody plants, trees and shrubs have a natural root growth phase. As they send down that extra food to their root system, the roots make up for lost time and go through a growth phase. If we plant shrubs and trees in November and December, we are tying into their natural growth cycle. We're planting them at a time of the year when the root system is ready to grow out into the surrounding soil. And what will make the difference between a plant living or dying? Establishment, the growing of roots into the surrounding soil. So trees and shrubs planted in the fall establish far more efficiently. That is, they send their root system out far better than a tree or a shrub planted in April or March when it's starting to grow. You plant a tree in March, it's not putting anything into the roots, it's putting everything into the leaves and the growth of the upper part of the plant. So again, cool season is a primary time for planting, especially the fall of the year. Late November into December is our prime planting season. There's no finer time of the year for us to plant hardy trees, shrubs, ground covers, and vines in the landscape. The cool season is defined by freezes. Although the temperatures tend to be relatively mild in the cool season, it is a time of the year that we can see freezes and potentially severe freezes. So plants that we put in this time of the year, hardy trees and shrubs, vegetables and flowers, have all got to be frost tolerant. They've all got to be able to tolerate temperatures down in the 20s. And so all the cool season bedding plants, pansies, dianthus, petunias, they're all hardy down to the low 20s or teens, and that's why they're appropriate for planting through the cool season. Any questions on that? I just thought I'd give you, if you've got the Louisiana Gardeners Guide by Joe White, and I wrote that book a while back, it discusses this. And again, it's a way of freeing us from the constraints of these traditional ways of looking at the seasons and looking at the year in a more appropriate way based on how we garden, what we plant, and when we plant in our landscapes. So I have just crammed your heads full today. I hope you survive all right. Your heads don't explode when you get home. Go over your information. If you have any questions, you can ask us, email me if you have any follow-up questions on the lecture. I'll be happy to answer those for you. And thank you for being such a great audience. Appreciate it.